Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my Through Faith t-shirt on, my King of Kings movie right next to me, and judging by the frame around me, we are back, taking down Joseph Hewes and his video, A Christian Apologist Who Left Christianity. Now, in the last section, Joseph made some bold claims. Couldn't back up a single one of his claims. I've since had a lot of activity in my comment section, people asking me, like, you mentioned that he was going to mention things about contradictions, but you didn't say anything about contradictions because there aren't any contradictions in the Bible. And, like, a lot of people just don't seem to understand that if you want to bring up contradictions in the Bible, that's on you. Okay, just like it's on Joseph here, to go through and try to push some kind of an agenda. That's not on me, that's on you. You are the one that has to kind of bring that up, okay? Because it's not up to me to do the, like, to show supposed contradictions and then debunk them. What you're supposed to do is, your claim is, the Bible has contradictions. Okay? That's Joseph's claims. That's some of the claims of the people in my comment section. So it's on you to bring up those contradictions, supposed contradictions, okay? So that people like me can answer them. The reason why they don't bring up any is because there really aren't any, and the ones that they want to bring up are the ones that people have brought up many, many times before, okay? And so, let's jump back in here and let's see where Joseph is going with this.
And I kind of wonder about these apologists who wind up getting PhDs and spending their entire lives defending God, telling the Israelite army to kill all men, women, and children. I wonder about these people.
Well, again, that's because, A, God is sovereign, okay? And that doesn't make me a monster. That doesn't make God a monster. That makes God sovereign over everything he created, okay? And God's ways are not our ways. And again, we went over this in the last episode, Joseph. You didn't seem to understand that God's very commandment to the Israelites, Exodus chapter 20, in case you never actually read this, okay, the 10 Commandments, he literally stated as his first commandments, okay, you shall have no other gods before me, you shall worship no other gods, you shall make no carven images, no graven images of any idols. And to reinforce that, he told the Israelites on numerous times, when you enter the land of Canaan, which I'm giving you, okay, you need to go in there and you need to kill everybody in those towns. Because if you don't, here's what's going to happen. And guess what? You read through Joshua, that didn't happen. Then you read through Judges, and it literally is a cycle. Okay? We went over this. The problem is that people like Joseph think, well, if I was God, and I had my sensibilities that I do today, I would not be asking. I would probably be, telling people, well, don't kill them all. Get them to worship me. But that wasn't possible back then, buddy. That's the point. And God knew that. Because again, God is omnipotent and God is omnipresent. He's everywhere and he knows everything. Okay? And so he knew what was going to happen to his chosen people, Israel. And it literally happened. Okay? Ahaz and Manasseh, 2 kings of Israel, okay, did the exact thing God told them not to do. And we read that in the last part, okay, in the book of 2 Kings. And the funny thing is that, if you'd read the Bible, Joseph, at all, okay, if you'd actually read the Bible, you'd know that, okay? And this is the problem with people that don't want to read the Bible, okay? Now, one final thing I want to bring up before we jump back in. I happen to be jumping through some of my books today because I was looking for some ammunition for my Christy Burke series and for the Holy Kool-Aid series. And I found this book. It is called The 10 Most Important Things You Can Say to a Jehovah's Witness by Ron Rhodes. And he has a lot of these different books. I believe there's one on Mormonism. There's one on Islam. There's a bunch of them. So if you're wanting to witness to different people, you have Jehovah's Witnesses that come up to your door, blah, 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 get this book. It's really good, okay? Because it kind of concisely states what Walter Martin talks about in this big old tome. Okay, it kind of concisely states it in a way that's easy to digest and understand so that you can quickly and effectively read what you need to read to understand in the Bible, to understand what Jehovah's Witnesses are changing in the Bible so that when you hit them with the scripture, you can say, no, that's not what the original Greek says, that's not what the original Hebrew says, this is what it is, okay? So if you're wanting to do that, get this book, okay? And also get this book because Walter Martin is kind of the leading authority on the cults, okay? And they've kept, after his death, his estate keeps upgrading and updating the book year after year. I haven't gotten like the newest edition, and it's like even thicker than this one from 97, okay? This is actually similar to the one my dad bought. And he went and bought the next edition back in like 2015, I think it was. And it was actually thicker because they'd added a whole host of new information to it. Okay, so just know that it's not, the Kingdom of the Cults is not a static book. They keep adding things to it. They keep kind of changing it around. So it's always a good resource just to have on hand. Okay, and even if you have an older version of it, it's still a good resource to have on hand because a lot of the information that they have is still valid even today because they haven't changed their beliefs, okay, in a lot of these cults. So anyway, that being said, let's jump back into this.
Yeah, I wonder, are they just flat out brainwashed?
No, we're not, because again, we're actually reading the Bible there, buddy. See, Joseph here isn't reading the Bible. He's just, what he's done is ever since becoming an ex-Christian, okay, he has now been spending his entire life listening to other ex-Christians and other atheists and other people, and so he colors his commentary with these buzzwords that the atheists like to use. Oh, you're brainwashed. Oh, you don't understand what the Bible actually says, because we're the ones that read the Bible, you're the ones that don't. Well, Joseph, I'm sorry to say, we're the ones that actually do read the Bible because we read the Bible in context. We take the Bible as it's written, not taking passages out of context and reading into them. Okay, again, see exegesis versus eisegesis. And the problem that Joseph here has is that he's trying to take things from his, like I said, he's trying to take his own life and he is trying to set a precedent over here by saying, see, God is a monster because he ordered the killing of men, women, and children in the land of Canaan. And that's wrong. Okay? How is that wrong? When the people were acting in a very sinful way. Because again, this was temple prostitution of children, of women, and of men. Okay? This was burning your children in a burnt offering to the god Molech. Lowercase g, god Molech, of course. But they were burning their own children. Okay? And that's why I was saying in the last part, this is what you're supporting, Joseph. If you're not, God is saying to the Israelites, if you don't do this, this is what you're going to end up doing. You are going to end up falling into this cycle of, falling into this idol worship, and you're going to fall away from me, and you're going to end up doing this very thing. And what ended up happening? Again, Ahaz and Manasseh ended up sacrificing their children to Molech and putting in temple prostitution. In fact, Manasseh killed so many people that the streets of Jerusalem ran red with blood, and God was like, we're done. I've had it up to here. You guys are done. You're going out of this land for 70 years because I've had it with you. I have told you the error of your ways from many of my different prophets. You haven't listened, and now is the time. And he chucked them out of the land for 70 years into Babylon. Okay? Now, he didn't let Babylon get away with the slaughter that they did. Okay? He actually came back and said, enough is enough, after 70 years, and had other Assyrians and Persians come in and decimate the Babylonians in pretty much the same way that they did. Okay? In fact, Christy Burke had a problem with one of the Psalms because the Psalm was literally talking about, blessed are those who will dash your children against rocks, because you're going to feel our pain, is the implication. And she was like, oh, these people, this is the pro-life crowd. No, we're not for actually killing the babies, and neither were the Israelites. What they were saying is, you did that to us, and now you're mocking us, saying, sing songs of your homeland, do this, do that. Then they turn around and say, you know what? Judgment is coming on you, Babylonians. And when it happens, oh boy, it's gonna happen to you. And when it does, we're gonna be the ones shouting in the streets. We're gonna be the ones rejoicing. Why? Because the pain you feel is the pain we feel right now. That's the implication of that verse. And that actually happened. Because Babylon was smashed, okay? And basically, like Joel and Nehemiah and a few of the other prophets, again, as I've stated, were given money to go rebuild the temple. And they did. Okay? Now, some of the Jewish people were taken off to Persia. Okay? And that was Xerxes. Yes, the same Xerxes from... Where are you? Ugh. This movie. Yes. The one who called himself God King. Xerxes. Okay? Because he did. He fancied himself a god on earth. Just like, some of the other people were. The problem with people like Joseph is that they don't seem to understand that God's ways are not our ways. And sure, we look at the extermination of the Jews in the Holocaust. We look at the death of 20 million Jewish citizens and other citizens of the former Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, and we think, that is so bad. We look at the execution of the 17,500 officers in the Katan Forest and Polish officers in the Katan Forest. We look at the killing fields in Cambodia, and we go, that is so evil. Why would people do that? And yet, we forget that God told the Israelites to do the exact same thing. Now, I'm not advocating that today, anyone say, well, gee, God said we should go out and kill these people because he hasn't told us anything of the sort. But the reason why he told his people to go do that was because the people who were living in Canaan were more evil than all of those other people. Because while, yes, Adolf Hitler exterminated the Jews because he considered them an inferior race, okay? And same thing with Joseph Stalin. He executed 20 million Jews and other people of his own of his own countrymen because he felt they were inferior people, okay? And that's an evil act in and of itself. The acts being committed by the people living in Canaan at the time were way beyond what those guys were doing. Because those guys were basically just systematically exterminating. And I'm not talking about the other people, the doctors in the concentration camps that were running experiments and doing all of that kind of stuff, because that's evil on a whole nother level. I'm just talking about the actual just, here, we're going to throw them in crematoriums and we're going to kill them. We're just going to line them up and shoot them. We're going to let them just die in prison. That kind of genocide, basically. The reason for that was because Hitler thought he was furthering his own race. Okay? He was furthering eugenics. Okay? Something that started with Charles Darwin in 1859 when he created The Origin of the Species. Okay? Because, yes, Darwin was a racist. That's absolutely 100% unequivocal. He was a racist. Okay? And he thought that the white man had evolved the furthest. Okay? And that other people, because they had darker skin, and they looked more ape-like, they were not as evolved as far as the white man. Because we had evolved the furthest from the ape. Okay? That is racial thinking. And it is wrong thinking. And that thinking permeates every aspect of evolution. That's why I call it evolution. Okay? That's why I pronounce it that way. It's because it is an evil way of thinking. Because that was the thinking behind Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. You may not want to believe it, but that was her thinking. She was a racist. That's why most Planned Parenthoods showed up in neighborhoods of people of color. Specifically, the African American community. And the reason why the African American community is only sitting at 13% of the population today is thanks to Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. They would be a lot more had there not been those abortion clinics sitting in neighborhoods of African American people. And them saying, oh, you don't need to have kids. Come in here, have them terminated. That is wrong. That is evil. That is the same thinking as the people of Canaan. And that kind of thinking to God is abhorrent. And he was like, if you don't get rid of that, if you don't purge that evil from you, that is something that he says many, many times, if you don't purge that evil from among you, you're going to start practicing that evil. And guess what? They did. And so, to Joseph here, I would say, buddy, you're on the wrong side of history if you think you're in the right. If you think that God was wrong to order the deaths of men, women, and children, they weren't innocent, son. They really weren't. Okay? And until you can come to grips with the fact that you're wrong and God's right, you're going to be banging your head against a wall. Trying to figure out, well, why did God do this? It's spelled out right there in the Bible. That what the people were doing was absolutely wrong. And so God was like, if you don't go in and smash them and kill them all, including the children, because the children are a part of it, if you don't do that, you're going to have issues. In fact, see King Balak and Balaam. Okay? Balaam was a prophet of the Lord. Here's the funniest thing. Balaam was a prophet of the Lord, and what did he do? He told Balak, if you want to snare the Israelites, send your pretty women among them. And Balak was like, oh. Because he's like, I'm not going to go out there and curse them, because God told me I can't. If I try to go out there and curse them, God's going to kill me. Okay? He's already tried it numerous times. Because he tried 3 times to go out there to curse the Israelites. And 3 times he got rebuffed. Okay? And one of them was the talking donkey. Okay? Because there was a flaming... there was a cherubim in the road. Okay? Swinging a flaming sword. And if they walked any closer, he would have killed him. Okay? That's how serious it was. And so, finally, Balak is like, I'm paying you all of this money. What am I paying you for? And he goes, you have to understand, I cannot go against the word of the Lord my God. But what I can do is skirt around it. That's called legalism, folks. Okay? It's like when Mike Todd says, I'm going to go right up to the edge of sin and reach right across, and I'm going to grab those sinners and pull them across. Son, you're sinning. You're having people twerk in your church on Easter. You're singing worship songs to Satan on Easter. That's sin, son. That's not towing the line of sin. That is actively sinning, but calling it church. That's what legalism does. And that's what legalism did to Balaam. And what ended up happening is that after a bunch of those people had passed away, or had gotten to a certain point, basically Moses said to the men, because God told him to, he said, now you can go up and you can kill them all. Okay? Take your revenge on the Midianites and the Amalekites, because they caused you to sin against the Lord your God. And he told them, don't bring any plunder back. And what ended up happening is that a bunch of the men brought like virgin women and children and like livestock and stuff back. And Moses is like, you idiots, what did I tell you to do? You won't listen. And so he told them that they had to stay outside of the camp for like a week to clean themselves and to sanctify themselves and sanctify all of the people that they brought back, because they were not followers of God. Okay? And he was like, and we're holding you responsible should they decide to trip you up. It's on you, not on us. Okay? So, yeah. This is the problem with this kind of thinking, is you start to try to make yourself morally superior to God, who is the moral standard, and then you try to make it out that, oh, see, God is trying to commit all this genocide. God is the one who's the problem. It's not God that's the problem, son. It's man. And man is the problem because man doesn't even know how to make things work. If it hadn't been for this book, where would your morals be? Oh, that's right, you wouldn't have any. Because every single moral law that we have on the book, like don't kill, don't steal, don't covet your neighbor's stuff, don't commit adultery, don't do all this stuff, all of that, where does that stem from? The one book you didn't read, Joseph. So, yeah, son, you're in it hip deep at this point. Because if you're not understanding why God is ordering those deaths, because you're not reading the Bible to understand why is God ordering those deaths, and you never read the Bible in the first place to understand why God ordered those deaths, you're a part of the problem, because now you're for that stuff, not against it. You're for temple prostitution and child sacrifice and that kind of really hideous stuff, because you're basically saying they did no wrong. Yeah, they did. If you'd bothered to read the Bible, son, you would find out they were abhorrent. And when they didn't drive them out, and it was funny because if you read the last few chapters of Deuteronomy, there's like a whole section, okay, on what happens if you disobey the word of God. And it is hilariously funny because it's exactly what happens. Okay? Basically, you turn to Deuteronomy 28, start in verse 15, okay, and you read all the way through to 68, okay, basically through the end of the chapter, okay, and it basically says exactly what happens in the book of Judges, okay. I will sum it up for you, okay. Starting in verse 15, but if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments, and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Then, he says, the Lord will send you on curses, confusion, and frustration, that all you undertake to do, until you are destroyed and perish quickly on the account of the evil of your deeds, because you have forsaken me. The Lord will make the pestilence stick to you until he has consumed you off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Okay? Skipping down to verse 25. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and you shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth. Verse 30, you shall betroth a wife, but yet another man shall ravish her. You will build a house, but you will not dwell in it. Shall plant a vineyard, but you shall not enjoy its fruit. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you shall not eat any of it. Skipping down to verse 36, the Lord will bring you and your king, whom you set over you, a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known. And there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone. You shall become a horror, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples where the Lord will lead you away. You shall carry much seed into the field, and shall gather in little, for the locust shall consume it. Okay? 45. All these curses shall come upon you, and pursue you, and overtake you, till you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and statutes that he commanded you. It shall be a sign and a wonder against you and your offspring forever, because you did not serve the Lord your God with joyfulness and gladness in your heart, because of the abundance of all things. Therefore you shall serve your enemies when the Lord will send against you, and hunger and thirst, and nakedness and lacking everything. And he will put a yoke of iron on your neck until he has destroyed you. Okay? And it basically goes on and on and on and on and on like that. Basically, it was basically saying exactly what happens. And like I said, read through the book of Joshua and then start reading through the book of Judges. And you start understanding that there is this pattern that is exactly what Moses told them would happen. They just did it. They would get abundant, they would have plenty in abundance, and they would forget the Lord, they would start worshiping other gods, so God would send an army to destroy them. Exactly as he commanded. Exactly as Moses said to them. He's going to send an army to destroy you, and then and then you're going to cry out for a savior. And so they do. They get to a low point. They cry out for a savior. God appoints a judge. That judge leads them back to the Lord. Okay? And then for the whole time that person is in, they are in abundance. And then they get to the high point of abundance. The judge dies. They immediately go right back to serving other gods. It's a cycle. It's about 350 years in Judges. Okay? Just cycles. Until they finally said, we don't want a judge, we want a king. And Samuel the prophet comes in and goes, you don't want a king. You have a king, that's God. You don't want an earthly king. Yeah, we do. See, Egypt has a king, the Assyrians have a king, the Amalekites have... Everybody has kings except us. It's like, no, you still have a king. No, we don't have an earthly king. You don't want an earthly king. Yeah, we do. Okay, it ain't gonna end well. This is literally the conversation, okay, that is happening between Samuel. I literally just read this about 2 months ago, okay? This is literally the conversation between Samuel and the Israelites. Samuel is basically trying to tell them, you are not going to like an earthly king. And they said, yes, we will love an earthly king. And they said, no, you won't. And so what do? He goes out and appoints Saul. Okay? Biggest, baddest man of them all. Okay? He's the hurliest, burliest, manliest man you've ever seen. Okay? Literally. Got the chiseled jaw and everything. Okay? And that's who they appointed. And he turned out to be somewhat okay king. Okay? But what ends up happening is that after Solomon, he had 2 sons. And those 2 sons split the kingdom in half. And on the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, okay, they kept the name of Jacob. The southern kingdoms took the tribe of Judah as their name. So Israel, the northern kingdoms, never followed God again. Okay? And they got conquered by the Assyrians very quickly. Okay? The southern kingdoms puttered on because about every 3rd or 4th king, they'd have a good king. They'd have King Uzziah, they'd have they'd have Hezekiah, they'd have Josiah, they'd have a couple of others. But the other kings were horrendous. And like I said, the worst 2 were Ahaz and Manasseh, because both of them sacrificed their children to Molech and raised up the Asherah poles and put up the high places and carved images of idols and everything like that. So much so that Isaiah spent 20 years of his ministry, okay, basically talking to Ahaz, Uzziah, Hezekiah, all these other kings of Israel, basically telling them what they were doing wrong. Okay? And yeah. But old Joseph here, he thinks he knows better than God. So who are you going to believe? A fallible man that doesn't read the Bible and doesn't know what the Bible actually says? Or are you going to believe God, who has the inspired word? 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. All Scripture is God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that every man can be equipped to do the work that God sends for him. Okay? I think I'd rather believe the God of the Bible, not this dude over here who doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
Or do they lack the ability to reason? Or they lack the ability to use logic? Or are they flat out dishonest?
Well, you're all 3, buddy. Okay? Because you're not using reasoning skills. Reasoning skills is reading and understanding and then making a determination based upon what you read and understand. That's what reasoning is. Okay? And Joseph here doesn't even know how to do that, because he's never read the Bible. Okay? That much is clear. If he had read the Bible, he would have understood a lot of this stuff. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now. I wouldn't be making this video in response to him, because he wouldn't be making this video. He would have gone, oh, okay. God understood where they were going to go. And he didn't want that for Israel. But they went there anyway. Oh, that sucks. That's the response. That's the reasoning response that you come to when you read through the actual Bible and you get to 2 Kings and you go, ho ho, fallout. Like literal fallout from Joshua. Okay? You never know what kind of waves are going to happen from ripples. And the problem is that this guy is looking at not even the ripples, he's looking at the stone, and he's going, that stone isn't going to make any waves. What the hell is God doing with that stone? He's showing them that tiny little ripples are going to create massive waves one day. But the problem is that you can't see the waves, Joseph, because you're not understanding that the stone is the warning. If you don't do what I tell you to do, this is what's going to happen, plump. It's literally right there for everyone to see and read. The problem is, people like Joseph aren't reading the Bible. And some people are going to say, well, he's reading it right now. He's telling you this thing, this thing, this thing. No, he's not reading it, dude. He's taking sections out of context and eisegeting his own flawed worldview into it. Because he doesn't understand the full context of why is God ordering these people to die. I mean, some people could have said, a better argument would have been, why did God cause the firstborn of Egypt to die? Well, it's pretty simple. He needed a miracle. He needed to show not just the Israelites, but everyone, because Egypt was the most powerful nation at that time. And killing off every single firstborn male of Egypt would have set them back by decades. Because now, sons that would have grown up to become soldiers and kings and advisors and other people in the society are gone. And now there's a fear of God, a healthy respect for his people. And Egypt never messed with Israel again. At least, not in the Bible. In fact, Joseph, of Jesus' parentage, Joseph took Mary and the baby Jesus and went and hid in Egypt for like 5 years. Okay? Because Herod the Great decided that he wanted to commit a little genocide of his own. Kill all male babies under 2 in Bethlehem, just to be sure that we got the Messiah. In fact, this movie actually talks about that. Actually deals with it. Okay? It actually shows the soldiers kicking in doors and killing the children and doing all of this stuff, and then it shows Herod the Great dying. Okay? Now in this movie they made Herod of the Bedouin tribe. Okay? Basically they were a tribe that lived kind of southeast of Jerusalem, or kind of southeast of Israel, kind of down in the desert area where modern-day Saudi Arabia is today. Okay? Because they had made peace with Israel. Or, not Israel, Rome. They had made peace with Rome, and the reasoning in this movie, and we don't know that Herod the Great was or not, but in this movie, they make Herod a guy who is a Bedouin, okay, and he's installed as a governor under Pontius Pilate, okay, and at the time I think there was a different Roman governor when Herod the Great was in there, and then his son Herod Antipas succeeded him, okay, and like they show Herod the Great basically dying because the weight of the amount of genocide that he committed, like, weighed heavily on him, so much so that he ended up dying. Now, do we know that for sure? No. Okay, because we're not told how Herod the Great really died. The only way we know is we read Josephus and it just says that he died. We don't really know how he died. We just know that he died. And then Joseph was basically told in the dream, okay, Herod the Great's dead, you can go back now. And he packed up his wife and his kid, and they went back to Nazareth, where they lived for 7 years, because it was about 5 years in Egypt, and then they spent 7 years there. And then we see in, I think it's Luke, the boy Jesus up in the temple, teaching in the synagogue, in the temple court, and then the next time we see Jesus is when he's a full-grown man, when he starts his ministry. Okay, so we don't really know that much about that time period. That's one of the reasons why Josephus wrote his Antiquities and wrote his battles and various histories of that time period, because he was told because the problem is that the Romans were in this very volatile region of Israel. It was called Palestine at the time, but it was this very volatile region, which is modern day Israel. And like Caesar basically called up a historian, which happened to be Flavius Josephus, and he comes in and he goes, okay, I want you to go down there. I want you to find out what the hell is going on, because they got some weird stuff going on down there. So go find out their history, figure out what we can do to kind of make this work. And and he did. And so he went down, and that's why he wrote a lot of his stuff, and that's why we have a lot of Josephus's work on Israel, the kings, and all of that stuff. And it all backs up exactly what was being told in the Bible, Old and New Testaments, because he was there post-Jesus, post-resurrection Jesus. And so he had talked with a lot of the Pharisees, he talked with a lot of the Christians, he talked with a lot of the Jews, he talked with the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He talked with all of those people to get their history. Okay? And so he learned their history, and he wrote it all down. Because some of the history was not written down in the scriptures, it was written down in places like the Talmud or in other books that they have that the scribes and the Pharisees kept. And so there was not one particular point where we haven't been able to look and say, yes, we know that there's people like this. And they've even fished out coins with Herod Antipas's face on them and Herod the Great's face on them from the first temple, I say first temple period, but the second temple that was built, that was the one that was rebuilt. So Solomon built his temple, and then there was the second temple that was built that lasted until 70 AD. And they've pulled coins out of there. They've even been able to get in underneath the Dome of the Rock. Some of the scholars, some of the archaeologists in Jerusalem basically told the people at the Dome of the Rock, they basically went up to the Muslims up there and they said, hey, when you guys are like digging out trenches to lay new cables or to reinforce corners or to do things, can we get in there? And after you get done digging, can we just come behind you and just kind of like dig really fast and just grab some artifacts, and then you can lay your cables and then pour it over? We don't want to disturb much. We just want to be able to come in and do this, because you've been digging out all this stuff and you're throwing out all these things, and we found really good artifacts, but you're kind of destroying them. And that's our heritage. And the Muslims went, oh, sorry? Yeah, sure, come on in. So I think it's ever since 2015, when the Muslims do some work in the Dome of the Rock, they invite some of the archaeologists from the university there in Jerusalem, the Israeli university, to come in and actually go in the little trenches that they dig, and allowed them to go in and kind of dig out some of the artifacts. And they're finding charred olive pits, they're finding like stuff from the first temple, from Solomon's original temple. And so they're like, yay, we can finally do this without having to sift through the detritus, because that's what they're doing. They have another pile where outside the Dome of the Rock where basically they've been dumping a bunch of the dirt and stuff when they do this. And so the Israelites, the Israelis there, have been in there digging in that pile to try to sift out the artifacts that are in there. And they found things from the second and from the first temple period. But they found more stuff from the first temple period because they've been digging down further to reinforce their foundations and run some new cables and some new like water lines and stuff. And so they're digging down a little deeper, and they're finding that underneath the second temple, they're finding a foundation of the first temple, and they're finding so much more stuff in that first temple period. And so for people like Joseph to stand there and say that the scriptures aren't authoritative, we now know that they are, because we have all of this evidence backing up what the scriptures tell us. And so for me, when I sit here and I listen to someone like him talk, I just scratch my head because it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's the reason why in the last episode I got so righteously angry at this guy, is because he just kept going on and on and on about crap that he doesn't understand. And he doesn't get why this stuff is in there. Okay? So, let's jump back in. We're going to go for a little bit longer, and then we'll call it an episode.
Where they've got these positions where they're making money, and that's what they do. They defend the Bible, and maybe they don't even believe it at all. Maybe they're just, they don't want to lose their job.
Are you talking about Bart Ehrman? Because Bart Ehrman only defends the scriptures in the context of they're ancient. Bart Ehrman isn't defending certain things. He's not an apologist in the classic sense. He's an apologist in the sense that when people like Joseph or some of these other pop atheists out there will come in and say, well, the Bible, there was no such thing as Jesus, there was no such thing as this, the Bible's just a bunch of fairy tales. He's one of the first ones to come out and say, now wait a minute. No, that's not true. Okay? We have historical evidence. We have archaeological evidence. We have anthropological evidence. We know that all of this stuff happened. We know that there was these things. Okay? And he tries to clap back against some of that stuff, because the problem comes in when you have people like these pop atheists out there who are like, yeah, but the Bible's just a bunch of fairy tales. No, it's not. Okay? Sure, there may be fantastical stories in them about miracles and people walking on water and doing all this other stuff, but the core tenets of the Bible, the actual stories themselves, are history. Okay? And what I said was true. Israel uses the Old Testament scripture as part of their history curriculum. They actually do. Okay? Because they teach people their history using the Bible. Because that is the history of their people. Okay? Whether they want to believe in it or not, that's their history. Whether they want to believe in the supernatural aspects of it or not, that's their history. Okay? That's what they're taught. And somebody was like, they don't. I'm like, yeah, they do. I'm like, go to Israel and tell them that they're not using the Bible in their classrooms and in their universities. They'll laugh at you. Okay? Because they are. I mean, it's you can't take a history course in Israel without studying some aspect of the Bible, because that's the history of their people. That is literally their history. Okay? Now, they use things like the Talmud, and they use other sources to back up that history. Okay? But they use the Old Testament as part of their history. Okay? Because the Jewish people don't believe that Jesus was the true Messiah. They don't know if he was or not yet. Okay? There are some Messianic Jews out there. Okay? There's a caveat. There are some Messianic Jews that do believe in Jesus. Okay? But by and large, most Jews, most practicing Jewish Orthodox people do not believe in Jesus as the Messiah. They believe the Messiah is still forthcoming. Okay? They missed him the first time. They're still God's chosen people. Okay? To this day, they're still God's chosen people. Even though a lot of them don't really follow the faith that much, and, some of them are openly atheistic, and that's fine. Yeah. They're still Jewish people, and they're still very nice people. Okay? So, but they do absolutely use the Bible as their history book. The Old Testament portion of the Bible. Most people forget that. And especially atheists. Atheists think that the Bible is a strictly Christian invention. No, it's not. Okay? The Bible is ancient, and it is in use today in synagogues the world over by Jewish people, the Old Testament portion of it. Okay? They still learn Hebrew. They still chant it in Hebrew. They still talk about it, and they learn from it today in synagogues. I knew some Jewish people when I went to school, when I was in high school. I knew some Jewish people that went to a local synagogue, and I asked them, "Are you guys, like, what does your synagogue do?" And they say, "Well, we come out and we do these things, and we go there and they chant some Hebrew psalms, and we kind of join in, and we do some different things." And I don't remember all the stuff that he told me, but he said it's kind of like your church service, just Jewish, because we're chanting sometimes in Hebrew and sometimes in English. I was like, that's kind of cool. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, we study some of the prophecy books, we study some of the Talmud, we study some of the different things. They have a bunch of different ways that they study the Bible, but they study the Old Testament, okay? Because they're looking for the Messiah. Because again, they missed him the first time. Okay? So what they think is going to be the first coming of the Messiah is actually going to be the second coming of the Messiah.
They have to put their children through college, right? So I wonder about these people. Now, of course, I've talked about Bible contradictions, so I guess I need to put up or shut up. I need to give you a Bible contradiction. And here's a doozy. Here's a real doozy. This is one of the Bible contradictions that Christian apologists don't really like to talk about too much. They won't even mention it to you unless you ask them, and then they'll kind of reluctantly talk about it, or maybe they don't even know about it. Some of them don't, certainly. So basically, Jairus had a daughter. Jairus was a synagogue official, and the question is, was she alive or was she dead? That's kind of a critical question. Let me read the verses to you. Mark 5:22 and 23.
Okay. So, starting in verse 21. When Jesus had gone by boat to the other side of the lake, a vast crowd gathered around him on the shore. The leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, came and fell down before him, pleading with him to heal his little daughter. She is at the point of death, he said in desperation. Please come and place your hands on her and make her live. Jesus went with him, and the crowd thronged behind. In the crowd was a woman who had been sick for 12 years with a hemorrhage. She had suffered much from many doctors through many years, and had become poor from paying them, and was no better, but in fact was worse. She had heard all about the wonderful miracles Jesus did, and that is why she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his clothes. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his clothing, I will be healed. And sure enough, as soon as she had touched him, the bleeding stopped, and she knew she was well. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him. He turned around to the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "All this crowd pressing around you, and you asked who touched you." But he kept on looking around to see who it was who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, healed of your disease." While he was still talking to her, messengers arrived from Jairus' home with news that it was too late. His daughter was dead, and there was no point in Jesus' coming now. But Jesus ignored their comments and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just trust me." Then Jesus halted the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go on in with him to Jairus' home except Peter, James, and John. When they arrived, Jesus saw that all was in great confusion with the unrestrained weeping and wailing. He went inside and spoke to the people. "Why all this weeping and commotion?" he asked. "The child isn't dead, she is only asleep." They laughed at him in bitter derision, but he told them all to leave, and taking the little girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples, he went into the room where she was lying. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Get up, little girl." She was 12 years old, and she jumped up and walked around. Her parents just couldn't get over it. Jesus instructed them very earnestly not to tell what had happened, and told them to give her something to eat. Now, in Matthew 9, okay, this is the same story, okay? It says, as he was saying this, a rabbi of the local synagogue came and worshipped him. "My little daughter has just died," he said, "but you can bring her back to life again if you will only come and touch her." As Jesus and the disciples were going to the rabbi's home, a woman who had been sick for 12 years with internal bleeding came up behind him and touched the tassel of his robe. For she thought, "If I only touch him, I will be healed." Jesus turned around and spoke to her. "Daughter," he said, "all is well. Your faith has healed you." And the woman was well from that moment. When Jesus arrived at the rabbi's home and saw the noisy crowds and heard the funeral music, he said, "Get them out, for the little girl isn't dead, she is only sleeping." Then how they all scoffed and sneered at him. When the crowd was finally outside, Jesus went in where the little girl was lying and took her by the hand. She jumped up and was all right again. The report of this wonderful miracle swept the entire countryside. Now, Luke 8. All right, so let's go to Luke. Okay. So Luke 8, starting in verse 40, and we're reading down through the end of the chapter. So on the other side of the lake, the crowds received him with open arms, for they had been waiting for him. And now a man named Jairus, a leader of a Jewish synagogue, came and fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come home with him. For his only child was dying, a little girl, 12 years old. Jesus went with him, pushing through the crowds. As they went, a woman who wanted to be healed came up behind him and touched him, for she had been slowly bleeding for 12 years and could find no cure, though she had spent everything she had on doctors. But the instant she touched the edge of his robe, the bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. Everyone denied it, and Peter said, "Master, so many people are crowding against you." But Jesus told him, "No, it was someone who deliberately touched me, for I felt healing power go out of me." When the woman realized Jesus knew, she began to tremble and fell to her knees before him and told why she had touched him, and now she was well. "Daughter," he said to her, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While he was still speaking to her, a messenger arrived from Jairus' home with the news that the little girl was dead. "She's gone," he told her father. "There is no use troubling the teacher now." But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to the father, "Don't be afraid. Just trust me and she will be all right." When they arrived at the house, Jesus wouldn't let anyone into the room except Peter, James, and John, and the little girl's father and mother. The home was filled with mourning people, but he said, "Stop the weeping. She isn't dead. She is only asleep." But this brought scoffing and laughter, for they all knew she was dead. Then he took her by the hand and called, "Get up, little girl." And at that moment her life returned, and she jumped up. "Give her something to eat," he said. Her parents were overcome with happiness, but Jesus insisted that they not tell anyone the details of what had happened. Okay, so there's no contradiction here. Okay, let's let him finish, and then we'll talk about this.
And one of the synagogue officials named Jairus came, and upon seeing him, fell at his feet and pleaded with him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, so that she will get well and live." Matthew 9:18. A synagogue official came and bowed down before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will become alive again." Okay, now an important thing to understand about these two verses is that the book of Mark was written before the book of Matthew. And scholars are almost universal on that. The book of Mark was written around the year 70 A.D., maybe a little bit thereafter. And the book of Matthew was written around the year 80 A.D., around 10 years later, 10 or 15 years later. And so this is the situation we have here. The book of Mark says that Jairus' daughter was sick at the brink of death, and that Jairus was asking Jesus to heal his daughter so that she wouldn't die. Now the book of Matthew comes along and says, no, she wasn't sick. She was already dead. And Jairus was asking Jesus to raise her from the dead.
Okay, so let's address this point and then we'll end the episode. Okay, so this goes back to what I was talking about before with witnesses. Okay, who was the eyewitness who told Mark what to write down? Peter, right? Where would Peter have been in the crowd? I mean, Luke 8 says it very, very distinctly, okay? It literally says, everyone denied it, and Peter said, Master, so many people are crowding against you. That means Peter is standing literally right next to Jesus. Matthew's probably further back in the crowd with the other disciples, okay? This is the deal. Two different viewpoints. Okay? You got Peter up here who sees Jairus come up. You've got Matthew who's kind of back. He sees Jairus come up, but he doesn't quite hear exactly what happened. Okay? Now, when he's writing his account, he probably asked one of the other disciples, hey, did you hear what that guy said? Oh, the guy says his daughter just died. Oh. So in his account, he writes down, my daughter had just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will become alive again. Okay? Because if you look at what Mark says, he says, my little daughter is at the point of death, which kind of sounds a little bit like has just died, right? Okay? So, if you're back in a crowd, okay, the crowd is crowding around, and Jairus comes up, right? And he's like, hey, my little daughter is at the point of death. And you can't quite hear, because you're further back in the crowd, and there's people talking around you, and you tap one of the disciples on the shoulder and say, hey, buddy, what did he say? Oh, he said his daughter just died, or something like that. Oh, wow. Okay, this is where we come in with the witnesses' statements, okay? Because here's the issue that we have with this supposed contradiction, okay? If the Gospels had all been written exactly the same, word for word, they'd be redundant. We wouldn't need 4 Gospels. We would only need 1 Gospel, right? We would just need a Gospel of John, or a Gospel of Mark, or a Gospel of Matthew. We wouldn't need 4 Gospels to tell the whole story, okay? Because we have 4 different viewpoints, told from 4 different people, okay? One is Peter talking to Mark, John Mark, okay? One is Matthew, who was a tax collector. One is Luke, who was a physician that was gathering information for Paul, okay, on the orders of a man named Theophilus, okay, who was a rich patron who basically was like, hey, to get Paul out of prison, go back down there and find out what was going on with all this stuff, okay? Get a gospel account and get what you guys have been doing the last few years. Cool. So he goes down there and does that. And then we have the book of John, okay? Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are what's known as the Synoptic Gospels because they contain pretty much the same information, just told in different parts, in different spots, okay? Some are told a little bit more chronologically, some are told a little out of order, but all of them are told pretty much from the same angle, okay? Here's Jesus coming on scene, he does all of his miracles, and then he goes to the cross, he dies, he rises from the grave. John's gospel is a little bit different, because he was aiming to tell a gospel that showed the absolute truth of who Jesus was. Okay? Whereas the other gospels talked about Jesus' divinity, John establishes from the outset that he was divine. Okay? Like literally from John 1:1, okay, he establishes who Jesus is. That's exactly what he does. Okay? And so you have 4 different viewpoints of similar events. Okay? And this is where J. Werner Wallace's cold case Christianity comes in. Because he was a cold case homicide detective. Okay? And what cold case homicide detectives would do a lot of the time is they would come in and they would sit down and they would say, okay, we're going to talk to people about this event that happened. Okay? We're going to talk to witnesses. We're going to talk to people who were there. We're going to talk to the jurors. We're going to talk to the people, and we're going to figure out what happened. Okay? These are cases that have never been solved. Maybe they went to trial. They had a mistrial. They're cold cases. Okay? And J. Werner Wallace didn't know this at the time. Before he wrote this book, Cold Case Christianity, he was much like... where did I put it? He was much like this guy. Okay? Josh McDowell. Okay? That's Josh. He was much like Josh McDowell. He was an atheist. He, was kind of... I don't know if he was challenged. I don't know what he did to do this. I haven't actually read through the whole book. I've just read certain parts of the book, and I've heard other people reference it. Other apologists reference it. I actually own the book. I just haven't actually sat down and read it all the way through. Basically, he set out to examine Christianity. Okay? The 4 Gospels, Acts, some of the letters of Paul, as if this was a cold case homicide. Okay? Because he was like, I'm a cold case homicide detective. I value facts. I value logic. I value all this other stuff over feelings and other things. Okay? So there has to be something to this. Otherwise, people wouldn't just be believing it on blind faith. There has to be something behind this. So he sat down and he went through the entire case of Christianity. Okay? And he set out to try to... I don't think he tried to disprove. I think he just looked at it from the standpoint of, how does this work? And he said, now, one of the biggest points of contention of atheists is that the gospel accounts are disparate. Okay? They don't all tell the same exact story. And J. Werner Wallace's statement to that is, good! Because they're eyewitness testimonies. And anyone who's been on a jury, worked in detective work, been a witness, will know that if your story matches perfectly with everyone else's story, there is a huge shadow of doubt cast. Because, generally speaking, the witnesses probably got together and got their story straight. They went in and rehearsed it. Okay? And they were told, this is what you say, this is what you do, blah, blah, blah. And then they tell it exactly the same way. And so one of the first things that he said was, you never, ever, ever, as a cold case homicide detective, you never, ever, ever want to see 4 of the same exact word-for-word stories out of witnesses. Because if you do, guess what? They've been talking. Okay? So, what this is, okay? What this is Matthew and Peter are in 2 different spots in the crowd. Okay? And it's likely that Luke probably talked with Peter, probably had a conversation with Matthew, and then had a conversation with Peter and realized that Peter was standing next to Jesus. And so he wrote down Peter's words about Jairus' daughter. Whereas Matthew is further back. He didn't see Jairus. He didn't know Jairus. Okay? So he just says a synagogue official came and bowed down before him. Okay? Which is the same thing as saying came and upon seeing him fell at his feet. Okay? It's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. Okay? And so, again, Matthew is back in the crowd a little ways going, what does he say? Did he say his daughter just died? That's what it sounded like to me. Huh. Peter, standing right next to Jesus in the crowd, is hearing him saying, my little daughter's at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she may get well and live. Okay? So, if those two accounts had been the exact same, then we could have concluded one of two things. Either A, Matthew and Peter talked about this event beforehand, got their stories straight, or B, Matthew had been standing next to Jesus. But remember, Matthew's not a part of the inner circle. The inner circle being Peter, James, and John. James and John being the two brothers, okay? And Peter being the rock that Christ said, I'm going to, on this rock I will build my church, okay? So, and John being the one that wrote his gospel, okay? So, and this is not James. This is not the writer of the book of James. This is James, the brother of John, okay? James, the writer of the book of James, was a brother of Jesus. Okay? And after Jesus' resurrection, he saw the risen Jesus and he became a believer. He became a firm believer in Jesus, and he went out and did some things, and he wrote a letter. Okay? That's where we get that from. And also Jude was one of his brothers too, one of his half brothers. Okay? He was one of Joseph's kids. Okay? They were half-brothers of Jesus, okay? James and Jude were half-brothers of Jesus, the writers of their respective epistles, okay? But James was the brother, he's the one that they called the sons of thunder, okay? They were fishermen like Peter, okay? In fact, in a lot of the gospel accounts, they're on the shoreline with Peter because they're all fishermen and they're mending their nets. And Jesus walks up to them and says, come and I will make you fishers of men. Or he takes them out in their boat, and then when they get the miraculous catch of fish, he says, come and I will make you fishers of men. Okay? And again, it's only disparate because we're coming at it from different points of view. Okay? I don't know if anyone has ever seen this film. It is excellent. You have to stick with it. Okay? It is not one of those that you can just put on and tune your brain out. You have to sit down and you have to really pay attention to it. Okay? But it is really, really good. Okay? Dennis Quaid does a very good job. There's Matthew Fox, Forrest Whitaker, Sigourney Weaver, and William Hurt plays the President of the United States. It's a really good film. And what it is it's about how everyone's vantage point changes and certain things happen. And more of the story is revealed the more people's vantage points are added together. That's what we get in the Gospels. Yeah, Mark was written first. And Mark is what everybody calls the action gospel. It literally just goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next. It doesn't spend a whole lot of time on a whole lot of subjects. It just kind of says what it says and then moves on to the next point. Says what it says, moves on to the next point. Matthew's gospel was likely the one that was written next. And Matthew's gospel was the one that actually kind of opened up the stories a little bit more. Had a lot more detail. Matthew was a tax collector. Very detail-oriented. Okay? So Matthew had to have a lot more Matthew needed a lot more detail to tell his story. So he was like, hey, I'm going to make sure that I tell this story correctly. Okay? And then, like I said, Luke's was cobbled together from him talking to a lot of the different apostles. Okay? And then talking to people like Barnabas and Paul himself and, Timothy and, Cyrus and some of the other people that are mentioned in, like, say, the book of Acts. And so there's a whole lot more. And then, of course, John, like I said, his gospel was more established from the outset as putting this is who Jesus was. He is the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he's literally setting up Jesus as the Word, which in Greek is logos, or logos. Okay? And if you're familiar with the Matrix, what was Niobe's ship? Logos. And who ended up on it in Revolutions? The One. That was the parallel. Okay? There was a lot of parallels to biblical stories, okay, in the Matrix movies. There's a lot of parallel to Jesus with Thomas Anderson / Neo. Okay? He was basically set up to be a Jesus figure, and then he has to kind of deal with being Jesus. Okay? Because he dies and resurrects, and then he flies around, and he does all this crazy stuff, and he has to kind of deal with that now. Okay? And so that's kind of why Reloaded feels so disparate, is because A, they had actually written the sequels as an actual trilogy, not the first Matrix film and then 2 more. It was actually the first Matrix film and then 3 more. It was actually conceived as a trilogy, but Warner Brothers only gave them enough money for 2 movies. So they had to hack up Reloaded, okay, because they knew that they wanted Revolutions to remain largely what it was, but they had to hack up Reloaded, and so some of that made it into the Animatrix, okay? Some of it ended up in, I don't think I have it right here. I don't have it right here with me. I think it's right over there, but it's Enter the Matrix. It's, let me grab some of it. Most of it ended up here. Okay. This is a story where you actually play as either Niobe or Ghost, and you're on the Logos, and they tie it in with Final Flight of the Osiris, which is this one right here. It's the first one on this one. It was the last picture done by Square Pictures, the creators of Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Okay, they the Wachowskis saw Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, and they when they realized that they were not going to be able to make the story the way that they wanted to, and that they were going to make this the Animatrix, they approached Square and they said, "Do you think do you think you're up to the task?" And they said, "Well, let's see." And so Andy Jones, who was the lead creative director on the film, ended up being the director of the short Final Flight of the Osiris, and and basically he goes he went through like basically he said, okay, send us a Sentinel model and we'll see what we can do. And so they took Aki from this movie, okay, and to make it so that her hair wasn't, kind of crazy and all flowy and weird, they basically just shaved her bald, and, well, not bald, but buzz cut her hair, and then had her fight the Sentinel in kind of a Matrix style reality to make sure that they could do it. And it's actually on the disc if you watch the special features on the making of the Final Flight of the Osiris. You'll actually see where they talk about doing that. And so they quickly put together a whole bunch of new things, and they recycled some models from Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. some rejected models that they hadn't used, some other models that were just kind of in the background, some of their civilian models and various things like that. They cleaned them up and then they put them in to make them that way. And then they also got the Sentinel Swarm model from the Matrix movies. And then, of course, you have Enter the Matrix. My point is, with all of that, okay, is that when you have certain stories told certain ways, okay, you end up with what seems to be a contradiction, but when you actually analyze the story, you realize that Matthew isn't near Jesus, and so he's not hearing that correctly. Okay? So, was Jairus' daughter alive? It's likely she was. Okay? It's likely she was. And then Jesus went and raised her from the dead. Okay? Because it's likely that Matthew didn't hear Jairus speak. Okay? Because in his gospel, Matthew doesn't actually say, in fact, I don't think, let me jump over there really quick here. Yeah. See, he doesn't have the part where the other men came up and told Jairus, don't bother the teacher anymore, your daughter's died. Okay? So, he just cut that part out because he probably didn't realize that the other people that came up was telling Jairus, hey, your daughter died. Okay? Because he thought, oh, his daughter's already dead. So, maybe these guys are just coming and telling him, that they're getting ready to take her away to go bury her or something like that, and he just didn't include it in his Gospels. Okay, because he didn't think it a necessary part, because in his mind, she was already dead at that point. Okay, and so again, this is the point that I'm trying to make, is you have two separate viewpoints of the same event. Okay, and from those two separate viewpoints of the same event, you're seeing things a little differently. Okay? And those stories, they still line up, but they're told just a little bit differently because one guy heard something and another guy heard another thing. Okay? And that's why witness statements, that's why we have cross-examination, that's why we have, that's why the prosecutors will ask questions of people of certain events, because they will ask questions like this. Okay? If this had been today and, Jesus had died and people were trying to find out, they might have asked Matthew, why did you say Jairus' daughter was dead? Well, because I was kind of far back in the crowd. I didn't quite hear Jairus say that, that his daughter was at the point of death. I heard she had just died. Oh. It's like the end result is still the same, right? Didn't Jesus go and raise her from the dead in all three stories? Yeah. This is the problem with people like Joseph, is that they don't understand that the gospel accounts were written by different people standing in different spots away from Jesus. So sometimes they might have heard Jesus clearly, other times they may not have heard all of the stuff that was clear. And so the way that things were told, the way that things were written down, were from that person's viewpoint. And in Matthew's mind, he heard Jairus say, my daughter has just died. He didn't hear, my little daughter is at the point of death. Okay? So that's the point. This isn't a contradiction, folks. It's two different viewpoints told from two different spots in the crowd. That's the point. Because witness statements should never be 100% equal. If they are, you've got a problem. And you can talk to any homicide cop, okay? Cold case or no, any homicide cop, any prosecuting attorney, any defense attorney in the world, and they will tell you, if the witness statements are exactly the same, we start questioning whether or not somebody got to them and coached them in what to say. And if we'd seen that in the four Gospels, not only that A, they would be redundant, but B, we'd probably all be sitting here going, what did they do? They all got together and got their stories straight, right? Then you would have more ammunition to actually be able to stand up and say, you see, all of these statements are the same. Makes you think, did they talk? Yeah. And because they're not, we know that they're not. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think of this series so far. And as we say, we will see you on the next one.